after the subsequent Discord fiasco and the creations of both my Stoat and Fluxer accounts, which I guess I'll get into before I continue on with the rest of today's video, don't worry, this is relevant to the discussion. Yes, I do still think that looking for alternatives to Discord is necessary, since Discord is kind of a rotting platform anyways, and they did recently just double down, and plus, who's to say that they won't just attempt to do something worse later on down the line? Never, ever, ever allow Discord access to your ID voluntarily, or even involuntarily. If they start doing it involuntarily, then you move to another platform. Remember to exercise extreme caution when you're using Discord to engage in political action of any kind, especially in any of the countries being shown on the screen. This includes things like VPN usage or backdoor channels into utilizing a service. Even if you don't leave Discord right away, it is still smart to have a backup plan in case shit hits the fan. I would also like to advise you to not purchase Nitro until Discord completely announces that they're not going to be doing any level of ID verification. And last but not least, Discord is not a secure channel of communication and is still owned by a massive venture capital-backed company. If you are engaging with politics and things get out of hand, do not use Discord to communicate with people at a demonstration. Remember, the internet belongs to us as well. It is not just meant to be a playground for these rich tech oligarchs, believe it or not. Now, I recently started looking into ID verification platforms due to the aforementioned Discord debacle, and I gotta say, one, it's fucking horrific, and a lot of things keep happening all the fucking time, but also, man, there are a lot more services than I thought that use Persona.
Techmo isn't Persona that one game developed by Atlas that is beloved by many.
No, Silica, I'm not talking about that Persona. I'm talking about the other Persona. The identity verification service that has had multiple data breaches, sells your personal data to data brokers and any other company that might want to train their AI models off of you, and is connected to one of the most demonic individuals in the tech space, Peter Thiel. I have so many things that I could say when it comes to this thing, and God, the thing, thing. It's gonna take an act of God to make me call Peter Thiel or any of his goons people. Because they're not. They're not people. They're things. Okay, now I actually have to elaborate on what Persona is. Persona, for those of you who don't know, is an ID and age verification service that started off with the intent to crack down on online fraud, so it claims. It was founded by Charles Ye and Rick Song, two former engineers at Dropbox and Square, or I guess Block Incorporated, the company that now owns Square, Cash App, BitKey, and Weebly. Keep in mind, Persona has always been notoriously bad, notoriously insecure, and has always been connected to really horrible entities. So why does this relate to Peter Thiel, and why does this relate to being a ubiquitously bad thing for companies to associate with, or, even worse, for companies to use? Well, here's the thing. Peter Thiel backed the company in 2021 with the Founders Fund that he has, pumping over $150 million into the company. Peter Thiel is the chairman of another company known as Palantir Technologies Solutions. Again, I'm not going to meander on this too much because this entire topic could easily be its own separate video. However, Palantir Technologies is a company that is named after the orb that the Great Elves used to watch over the parts of Middle-earth in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings series of books and films. If that wasn't ominous enough, wait until I tell you what Palantir's entire gimmick is. The entire selling point, the entire marketing for Palantir is that it is a company that harvests as much data as humanly possible, packages it up, and then sells it to the United States government and other corporations and other governments that might be interested in getting your information for advertising or for making money, and in some cases, political operations. They also have multiple defense contracts with the United States and are known for working with the Israeli occupation forces in terms of keeping tabs on individuals within the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, as well as any sort of political dissidents inside of Israel as a country itself. By the way, this is a huge part of why you never hear any sort of left-wing criticism in Israel against the genocide in the Gaza Strip and the illegal settlements that are being placed around the West Bank and even inside of the West Bank. It's because the government over there will probably go after you if you speak out against genocide using Palantir technologies. They will identify you in Israel using Palantir technology. And then, there you go, off to the brig with you. Now, you might be thinking, well, at least it's somewhere else and not here. Which, firstly, just because it happens somewhere else does not mean that it can't happen here, but also, it's not a good thing to begin with. For example, Palantir works with OpenAI to collect things like Medicaid and Medicare information, citizenship status, immigration status, face scans, driver's licenses, and will actively keep tabs on even things like individual crimes, only to hand those over to the feds. To put it as simply as possible, Palantir and OpenAI are the big dogs in the neighborhood when it comes to handing the feds as much data as they possibly can about you, or about anyone else that you associate with. So, please, do not use OpenAI or Palantir services. Just fucking don't. Stay away from them if you can. Actually, not even if you can, just stay the fuck away from them. This is one of the many multitudes of reasons as to why I tell people to stay away from things like ChatGPT or to stay away from platforms that force you to verify your ID as much as possible because of the extremely unethical operations of OpenAI and the unethical operations of Palantir on a day-to-day basis. Now, here's the entire point of all of this. With Peter Thiel and Sam Altman being directly involved with Persona, a company that has had data breaches that exposed sensitive information not that long ago, and a company that doesn't know how to secure its own goddamn front end, leaving it completely exposed, a company that has had its code floating around on a Google Cloud endpoint this entire time, a company that views people not as people, but as a bunch of fucking guinea pigs to be tested on to refine algorithms. Do you trust any of that shit? Like, do you trust any of that at all? How could you trust that? The reason I'm asking that question is because it seems like there is a broader push to force age and ID verification onto people who use different pieces of software, whether it be for communication, entertainment, business, or ChatGPT on a business level. Now look, I'm not going to talk about the ChatGPT one necessarily, because I think anyone in the tech space who is at all near the positions that I am, at this point are probably aware that ChatGPT is demonic tech developed by demons to force people to become stupidly reliant on it as a means to an end. Now look, I could go on and on and on about age verification and ID verification on the internet and all the bad implications that it has on a cultural, societal, political, economic, just on all these different scales, right? Tying your name to your financial purchases is a really fucking bad idea. Now, let's say that I use Discord and I submit my ID that has my name, my date of birth, and everything else on it, right? If I were to submit that, and Discord started tracking any sort of purchases or messages or anything that I made on Discord, then I'm fucked. If I decided to talk to someone about politics and Discord did not like the type of discussion that I was having, fucked. This is not just for people in the United States, by the way. I might be talking a lot about the United States because I live there, but think about this, right? What if you're an independent journalist out in Russia who's speaking against the illegal actions going on in Ukraine? You're fucked. You're boned. You are absolutely boned. You are out of there, right? Or imagine that you're a Chinese citizen using Discord through a VPN, right? one, you're already going to be facing a crime for using the VPN to circumvent the infrastructure out there anyways, but you're already going to be you're going to be getting in even more trouble if you use something like Discord. And so you're fucked, right? And in the United States, now if you're going against ICE or you're going against literally anyone that you do not like in the government, there is a small percentage chance that you could get fucked over that, even if it's not illegal. Even if it's not illegal on paper, who the fuck is to say that ICE can't just show up to your door because it's really funny? It's a really funny, goofy thing to do on a Tuesday. And if you don't think that the United States has an apparatus for something like that, one, it definitely does, and nobody really talks about it that much. And two, we literally did this in the 1960s when it came to people talking about communists, when we had fucking McCarthyism. Okay? When people were calling each other communists, the feds would show up. So if we were able to do that in 1962, then yeah, we can definitely do that in 2026. Okay. Now, there's a reason why I'm ragging a lot on Persona, and that is because in the United States, for some fucking reason, I can only imagine that it is because of government contracts and the fact that everybody's just doing circular investments into one another all the time. But so for some fucking reason, everyone is trying their damnedest to use this one service, and if they're not using Persona, then they're using something else that is just as bad as Persona, and if they're not using that other alternative, then they're using their own that they developed in an afternoon, like Facebook. Just try to make an account. Try making an account. They want you to try using a 3D scan of your face to create an account. I know this because I tried to help someone create an account at one point, and it tried to get a 3D scan of their face, and they were fucking confused by it. Because that's not how it used to work, that's not how it used to work, and that's not how it should work. Now look, given the fact that it is mostly older people that are trying to create Facebook accounts, do you really trust Facebook with your grandmother or grandfather's face or biometric data? Well, especially after the recent patent that they filled out in which an AI can just take over your account after you die? No. No, the answer should be an outstanding no. Absolutely the fuck not. Oh, and by the way, something that I should bring up in this video is the fact that a lot of this information is being directly fed to AI platforms, the United States federal government, and credit bureaus. And that is according to a source that discusses military intelligence practices and military levels of operational security. So, if a military OPSEC platform is saying that this could cause problems, then maybe you should say, yeah, this could cause problems. Especially depending on where your name and information has been and any sort of activities that you've engaged with, whether that be going to a political protest or buying a bad dragon. Look, Facebook should not be trusted. Persona should definitely be trusted exponentially less. Now, I hope that you don't use any of the services that I am showing on screen, because they're all linked to Persona in some way, shape, or form, in terms of identity verification, or in terms of just general backing. Now look, it is possible for us to win this battle over our privacy and where we are allowed to go online without an ID, because the last time I checked, we were able to bully the absolute hell out of Discord, not just once, but twice, by mass canceling Nitro subscriptions. I know it doesn't feel like it, but it is actually genuinely possible to fight back against these companies for engaging in bad and malicious behavior. If one guy says, you just lost yourself a customer, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't mean shit. But if 6,000 people all at once say, you just lost yourself a customer, for different reasons, or because they all struck as a group, then that actually does do a little bit of damage. And then a week later, 3,000, and then a week later, 4,500, and then the company will look at that, and they'll say, wait a second, this is not good, because their entire job is to generate as much revenue as possible. And believe it or not, even though shareholders hold a lot of power in terms of where money gets thrown around and where money gets made and how money gets made, shareholders are not the be-all end-all of how these services work. You still have to provide a service. And if you don't provide a service, then you're fucked. Just think about how Adobe is able to get away with a lot of the shit that it does. Just think about how Nvidia gets away with a lot of the shit that it does. Oh, and believe me, both of those fucking companies get away with a lot of fucking shit. Okay, I know this is a little bit irrelevant, not necessarily to the discussion of ID verification, but just in general, right? I do need to go on a little bit of a side tangent. There is just one teeny tiny problem with fighting back against the government and these corporations. And I have a very hard time talking about this because I'm going to bash a lot of people that I know personally, and bear with me, I'm not trying to make this sound inflammatory or anything. However, fighting back requires discipline and a lot of it. Fighting for your privacy means making accounts on other platforms and looking for alternatives. Hell, it means openly talking about it on the platform that you're planning on ditching. You need to build coalitions and safety nets. You have to actually lock the fuck in and commit to a plan. I hate saying this type of thing because I advocate for Gen Z. I am a Gen Z advocate. And because I am part of Gen Z. And I want Gen Z to thrive. I want Gen Z to be able to make this world a better place. I want Gen Z to make change because I have hope. I have hope for my generation that we are able to actually affect real world change. We have a lot of potential to do amazing things. We have the potential to do great things. We, along with Gen Alpha, are the generations of the future, and we have to start acting like it. However, I have heard this from so many people in Gen Z. I have heard these types of things. Oh, they already have all that information already. What more could they get? Oh, everything is owned by Trump. What's the point in fighting back if we can't do anything? I like using this service. I don't want to stop using this service. I'm not going to stop using this service. Do you think they haven't been collecting this information this whole time? Well, in some cases, yeah. I don't think certain apps have been collecting your ID. I don't think certain apps have been collecting your citizenship information, or your Medicaid information, or your social security information. Yeah, I don't think they have. My only response to this is no. They have not been collecting this type of information before. Get your fucking head in the game and fight back. If you go to a nightclub and the admission to get in is that a bouncer punches you in the stomach, would you want to keep going to that nightclub, or would you look for another nightclub in your area? Sure, it might sound a tad bit run down, and it might be a tad bit run down, or they might have some service issues. But think about it like this. If they had more customers, then maybe they'll have the incentive and the inspiration to turn a run-down, hole-in-the-wall club into something worth chatting about. It just requires discipline to sit down and say, I will not accept getting punched in the stomach any longer by a bouncer. This is getting out of hand. The club will notice, and they will change their policy. The last thing that you want is a company that is able to piss off everyone, that is able to make people scared, that is able to do a bunch of crazy shit and then not face any repercussions. That's how you get fucking OpenAI, Nvidia, and Adobe. That's how you get that shit. You have to unzip your pants and put your nuts on the fucking table and fucking commit. Okay, look, again, I'm not trying to bash anyone. I'm sorry, I just had to get that out of my system because it is something that has been eating away at me a decent amount lately. I do believe that we as Gen Z can do amazing things for both the real and online world. We just have to commit, and we can make a bright future for our children and our children's children when it comes to that. I have hope for us, and you should have it too. Alright, and now that we've gotten done talking about age verification on platforms, let's roll into the next chapter of this video.
Welcome to Chapter 2, where we will discuss operating systems, ID verification, political ineptitude and technological ignorance on the part of geriatric as fuck American politicians.
Yippee! We're almost done. We're on the part of the video in which we discuss the thing I really wanted to discuss. Not that I didn't want to discuss anything before this, but okay, look, you get what I mean. As of the time that I have began recording this video, there is a push that is going on in both California and Colorado to enforce ID verification on operating systems on a system level. Now, I don't know about you, but let's just say that the prospect of something like that should be horrifying, and they could definitely try to do that. However, there are some massive problems and nightmares with the mere idea of attempting to do something like that in general. Now, I understand that I am a person who knows computers more than the people who are writing this law, just by judging the fact that I have been using computers since I was about 5 or so years old. Both of my siblings are software engineers. My mom was very focused around, you will learn how to use the computer and you will be successful. Not including the fact that many years of schooling have been built around a digitized environment. And I specialize in tech-based policies. And in case you're wondering about that digitized environment thing that I mentioned earlier, you know, back when I was in school, they actually taught you about things like netiquette and learning how to use a computer and what things like Microsoft Word were. They actually focused on, you know, using a computer. We had the computer lab back in the elementary school, and it was a fun place to go fuck around, but also you used that to take your tests. I'm not saying that doesn't exist today, but I will say that there has definitely been a cultural shift around that, and I'll probably make another video talking about that in and of itself. So, in all honesty, as a person who has been around computers as much as I have, as a person who has used Windows 2000 and XP all the way up to Windows 11, a person who knows how to use macOS, at least on a surface level, and a person that is trying to learn a little bit more about Linux, and as a person who knows how complex making an operating system can be, not necessarily from first-hand experience, but just from general discussions that I've had about subjects similar to this, and as a person who messes around with random operating systems just for funsies, I think that I am exponentially more qualified to discuss this subject than anyone that is in any level of governance over the age of 45 that is not specifically a cybersecurity specialist. And that is being charitable, depending on the environment that said person grew up and worked in. I will say, I'm not necessarily an expert on things like kernel patches or anything like that fucking deep into the weeds when it comes to operating systems, but I will say Microsoft and Apple could potentially sue over something like this. Now look, it's one thing to try to force a phone-based operating system to do something like that, but like, okay, unless something gets funneled through some extremely large security update on older versions of Android OS, iOS, or iPad OS, then it's functionally impossible, because that kind of infrastructure is different from most devices. And besides, even being on mobile, people will find ways of getting around that type of shit. You know, jailbreaking and de-googling are things for a reason, and they have been things for years and years, and lots of people do that type of thing in order to gain more freedom to interface with their device in the way that they wish to interface with their device. It is an inevitability, because for one, the government doesn't know jack diddly shit when it comes to technology. And secondly, most people in the current government, given their lack of knowledge on this subject, won't even be able to keep up with such technological advancements. Now, aside from the fact that jailbreaking and de-googling are things that people have been doing for years and that people tend to do with their devices when they want to actually gain some level of freedom with their device, the reason I think Microsoft and Apple would have to sue are actually for different reasons, but they do kind of funnel back into the same reason, which is that they would probably sue because of the potential levels of damage that it could do to both companies reputation-wise and sales-wise. However, that is assuming that these two corporations give a fuck in an age in which corporations don't really give a fuck. So maybe I'm being a little bit too charitable. No, listen. A large chunk of the reason why Microsoft could potentially sue over this is because Windows 11 already has a bad rap, and people are already resisting Windows 11 by either A, swapping to Linux or Mac OS, or by staying on things like Windows 10, like what I'm doing. I'm on Windows 10. I refuse to use Windows 11 outside of a professional environment. And Apple refused to hand data over to the feds when a fucking shooting happened. So yeah, I don't think Apple is willing to cave on something like that either. Because Apple, and I cannot believe I'm going to say this, Apple is probably one of the very few tech companies that, like, somewhat gives a shit about people's privacy. Just a little smidge of a shit. Now, obviously, again, this would require them giving a fuck in a age in which corporations don't give a fuck, and so they could just become lapdogs and sit there and say, like, you know what, actually this is a great idea, because now we get to control more of the landscape, and now we actually get to harvest more data and make more money off of that. And I'm just gonna go off on a limb and assume that that is actually going to be the case, because that's how most modern tech companies operate in this day and age. Now, another theory that I have is the fact that this could actually cause a lot of people to also go back to Windows 10, right? And the reason I say this could cause people to go back to Windows 10 is specifically because it is end of service.
Techmo, Windows 10 is end of service. People should not be going back to something like Windows 10 because of security issues.
First and foremost, I'm not saying everyone should go back to Windows 10, but people will. And if people do, then I would surely hope that the people holding out against Windows 11 by going back to Windows 10, like myself, are exercising some level of OPSEC, whether it be advanced or just on the common sense level. I would imagine that only die-hard Windows users would stick to 10. Also, Windows 10 is currently offering extended security patches if you're on a specific branch. So there's that as well. But people might stick with Windows 10 as well, specifically due to the fact that a lot of people don't want to adapt to something like Linux, Mac OS, or Chrome OS. I know, basically the only other alternatives that are not something like free BSD, I guess. This is due to skill issues and people not being familiar with other operating systems, even though it might be the better choice in the long run, and I'm saying this as a person with Linux skill issues. I want to clarify that. This is not me trying to say that I'm better than anyone. I have skill issues. I'm going to work on them. And third, the likelihood of Microsoft going out of its way to update an operating system that is end of service in order to specifically age gate it would not only be very weird and illogical, but it's also extremely unlikely. And Windows users who are really invested in Windows will either sit in the cuck chair and daily drive Windows 11, or they will go back to Windows 10 and potentially suffer some consequences. After all, there are still business machines that run Windows 10. And by the way, I'm not saying that people will do this, but it is, I guess, theoretically possible that some nerds will end up doing this. And to those nerds, honestly, I can't fucking help you. I honestly cannot fucking help you if you're going all the way back to something like Windows 8.1 or Windows 7. Because apparently there is still a shocking amount of people using Windows 7 globally. For those wondering, here are all of the documented Windows machines and their operating systems that are connected to active networks. And for anybody who's talking about, oh, well, why are the things for Windows 8, Vista, and XP as high and as low as they are? Something to understand is that with Windows 8 and Windows Vista, nobody fucking uses those, and Windows XP are mostly used by businesses for some form of internal server or for ATMs or for tote machines or things like that. Therefore, it is easier to dismiss any actual utilization of said operating systems that are not Windows 7 and Windows 10, because I know some motherfuckers who still use Windows 7. So again, that lines up into the part where it's logistically impossible. Unless the government is going to force Microsoft to update multiple versions of Windows, then this is impossible to do, just by a sheer technicality. Now, the only thing that I could see causing people to not go back to Windows 10 specifically is if, one, Microsoft just decided to do something really funny and add age verification and ID verification to Windows 10, which is a technically deprecated operating system now. B, Microsoft decides to take down installs of Windows 10 on their knowledge base or on just the Internet Archive or any other site that has these installs. Or C, this law doesn't go through because people will realize that it's a waste of time, resources, and money. Or D, and this is one of the more likely options, people will just abandon ship when it comes to Windows entirely and start moving over to things like Linux, Mac OS, and like FreeBSD, because Microsoft is doing a bunch of insane shit all the time, and some people are willing to learn another operating system, even though I just talked about a lot of people not being willing to like learn an operating system. If you push people hard enough, they will do a thing. And by the way, I'm not even talking about previous versions of Mac OS or Linux or anything along those lines that are still supported. Let me put it this way. If the bill is not retroactive, then this is a completely ineffective piece of legislature that is entirely just a way of posturing that I am one of the people who thinks of the children, and people will just use the latest version of an operating system that doesn't take age verification. And for people that are on specific branches of Linux that might have something like automatic updates, I can already see in some cases where older versions of Linux that are being used, that are still supported, will be pushing around things like feature packages, hotfixes, and security updates, and is just not going to actually put anything through in terms of a system update for ID verification. That's if this bill is not retroactive. Like I said, it's just a very expensive way of using taxpayer dollars to posture that you're a good person. Even though there are definitely more effective ways of protecting children. For example, why don't we start arresting people that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein? I think that would protect children quite a bit. Now, if this bill is retroactive, then all I've got to say is GG's and good luck with the Herculean task that is placing ID verification on something like Windows ME, because you decided to be really goofy and not clarify anything because you're the United States government and nobody deserves an explanation for anything. At all. Ever. Especially when it revolves around technology. I gotta say, United States government, I'm gonna hand it to you. That's some absolutely fucking ingenious planning. Let's go back and have the Ubuntu developers look at old code for Ubuntu version 4.10 and then work their way on up to version 2.510. Please, 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 United States government, I am begging you to demand the Fedora Linux developers to go through and patch every single version of Fedora Linux and then demand them to patch Linux Red Hat. It would be unbelievably hilarious if you actually did try to demand something that insane. Not only would it be unbelievably hilarious if you tried to demand that, what about the special version of Android that a smart TV runs? Does that need to be age verified too? Please, US government, please tell me what your definition of an operating system is. Do I need to verify my age to use a TI-84 graphing calculator? Because believe it or not, those have BIOSes, and those do have operating systems. Define operating system, government. Please, I am begging you to define what a fucking operating system is. Because I can play with technicalities all day, every day. You don't know my bounds. I have a fucking degree in pedantry. I am a god among men compared to you. In the field of playing around with stupid fucking technicalities all day. Hold on, let me just verify my age on an Xbox One real quick.
Techmo, you are arguing in bad faith. Technicalities do not matter in this instance. The government is probably referring to the option that would specifically land them with the most power to do the most amount of damage, while assuming the most amount of control.
Well, no, I'm gonna counter that by saying that I'm actually arguing in good faith here, and I am being a completely honest actor. If the government wants to age gate and ID gate operating systems, then they should name the fucking operating systems. And Linux is not a good term, in and of itself, because of the number of distros and the amount of distros. Are we talking Arch Linux, Debian, Fedora, Manjaro, Ubuntu? What the fuck are we talking about here? Please, actually clarify. Are you talking about MX Linux? Is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about Bazite? What the fuck are we talking about here? Please, actually tell me what you're talking about here. I'm going to say the same thing about Mac OS, because we could be talking about Mac OS Classic, we could be talking about Mac OS X, we could be talking about modern Mac OS, we could be talking about anything if we just say Mac OS. Or Windows. What about Windows? Alright, we could be talking about Windows 1, 2, 3, 3.1. We could be talking about fucking 95, 98. We could be talking about 2000, ME. We could be talking about XP, Vista, 7, 8, 8.1, 10, 11. We could be talking about fucking Windows Longhorn. What do you want from me here? Because here's the thing, assuming the most amount of control, yeah, you would target very specific ones. But what about legacy ones that other people could be using? Because, like, that's what I'm talking about. This is completely impossible. I'm actually begging the government to actually put more than 3 seconds of thought into this subject. I'm not the only pedantic fuck that these people are going to be running into. The tech space is completely full of that. Because if I really wanted to get, like, extremely pedantic, I could be like, oh yeah, what about FreeBSD? What about Amiga OS 4.1? What about ROS? What about Arca OS? What about fucking OS 2, if it's maintained at all? Like, what are you... Just fucking tell me what you're actually looking for here. If you're going to make a policy decision, let alone a policy decision in which people have to identify themselves, then actually explain the policy decision. Is it that hard? Is it this complicated? Is it this fucking complicated to ask the government to know how to do its job? Is it this hard to expect the government to have a baseline understanding on how any of this shit works? The answer is no, by the way. The answer is just completely no. Now, there's probably, like, one country that I could think of that actually does do something like this, and that being North Korea. And guess what? In North Korea, they have a fucking specialized Linux distribution called Red Star OS, in which you have to be a system administrator to be able to install that onto a machine. And the thing is that entire thing, the entirety of Red Star OS and Red Star OS server, the entire gimmick around that is that the citizens do not install that. Tech people install that. People that actually understand what they're doing install that. Why? Because everything over there is controlled. Everything over there has some piece of infrastructure that has been built specifically to maintain a system like that. Now, unless we're going to be completely making a new department and doing centrally planned computers, making everything else illegal, and then making sure that everything is either sold back or confiscated by the government, I don't fucking see how this works. And you know damn well that people would start rioting if people from the government started breaking into buildings and just robbing their shit. Exhibit A, Minneapolis. The next thing I would like to discuss are things like workplace computers, domains, servers, and school computers. I honestly want to know how these lawmakers think any of these types of things are going to work. Does a system administrator have to age gate these? I'm being real here. Does a system administrator have to go through the age gate process or the ID verification process for their employees at the electric company to be able to log into a domain? What about for multiple computers on a domain? If you work in a workplace in which you're switching computers, do you have to verify your ID per computer? Or is it like a user account thing? How does this work? Because I'm very confused, and I'm coming from a person that works at an institution in which I log into an account that is shared by multiple employees at an area utilizing a domain as well. Do server administrators have to find a way to get around these age gate things to, like, keep their employees online as well? Or to maintain the server? How the fuck does this work? If somebody's running Unix on a server, does that mean that you have to ID verify yourself to the server to be able to do maintenance on it? What about kids trying to use school computers? Do children have to use their IDs or, like, biometric data on a computer? How do we know a company won't just sell that information for as much money as we possibly can? And I'm pretty sure the last time I checked, that was against United States law. You are not supposed to be collecting money from children using their data. Have you given up on actually enforcing that law? The answer is yes, by the way. They have absolutely done that. There is no way that YouTube Kids does not sell information. What counts as valid data and what doesn't? If you're on a computer that is on a domain, do you have to register your ID on every single computer that you touch that is on that domain? What about workers in the military? What about workers in the government? What about workers that are in the police? What about workers that are firefighters? What about workers at the hospital? You know, at a hospital, if you're getting new people and they have to register their ID to be able to use a computer, that can take a lot of fucking time in actually being able to process things in a hospital. This could especially be a massive pain in the ass for anyone that works in cybersecurity or any sort of IT position, especially for large institutions like I mentioned earlier, hospitals, tech companies, universities, banks. Just think about the amount of insane shit that has to be done in order to even make this law make sense. How the hell is this system supposed to be rolled out, and how is it supposed to work? I want to know the government's plan for rolling out this kind of nonsense, because once again, it seems like they're just talking out of their asses on some ambitious thing that just cannot be done. Okay, look, that's enough meandering. Let's talk about how this is truly impossible on a logistical and community scale. Both of these states have proposed penalties for violating this bill. I don't know if this is the buck being passed over to the user or if this is the buck being passed over to the operating system manufacturer. I don't know. Because like I said, considering the United States government loving to be as vague as it possibly can and as ambitious as it possibly can in manufacturing as much suffering as humanly possible, they didn't explain who is going to be getting the fine. So, it looks like there's going to be a $2,500 fine for negligent violations and a $7,500 fine for intentional violations, which doesn't sound like a lot, and for these massive companies, it's not a lot. Here's where I'm a tad bit confused though. Again, is this for the end user or is this for the company? Because if it's for the end user, then that would be an insane fucking thing to happen. To put this into perspective, if this is for the end user, this is like giving the end user 30 traffic tickets for speeding at the maximum possible rate in my state. Just letting you know, that is 30 speeding tickets if you were speeding by more than 20 miles an hour on the road. It's not out of the equation that this is a thing, because it would correspond with how the United States operates. Infinite suffering for its citizens for the sake of infinite suffering for its citizens. There is truly no reason for them not to try to push the buck onto you. What is just a little bit more stress in one of the most dumb and stressful countries on the planet? Just a little bit more stress for no fucking reason. If it's for the company or the developers, then tell me, who are you going to target for projects like Arch Linux? Because it seems to be, for just base Arch Linux, it seems like there are only two people that you could potentially go after, and I'm not naming those two people. Everyone else lives in other countries. Hell, one of them lives in China, and I bet the Chinese government would be really thrilled with you trying to exercise your laws over a Chinese citizen. Please, United States government, I'm begging you. I am begging you to tell me who you would go after for developing Debian or FreeBSD. I am begging you to tell me who is currently on the team for Debian or for FreeBSD. Oh, what's that? What's that? They're all community random volunteer projects? What? Really now? FreeBSD is not completely fucking centralized, and the same thing with Debian, it's not a centralized operating system with a clear list of developers? What? I'm sure that you can go through and start finding a bunch of random people on GitHub then. Do it. Fucking do it. You fucking pussy. And what about operating systems that are mostly developed outside of the United States? Are you just gonna ban them? Are you gonna make them illegal? Because chances are they're not going to make a specific United States version. Chances are they're probably going to try to protest this type of law, and they will still just be able to put it on GitHub. Are you gonna force GitHub to start taking that type of stuff down? Are you gonna start forcing like websites to just shut down entirely because the developers of Arch Linux are mostly fucking Swedish? Is that what's going on? Is that what's gonna happen? Also, do you think that Linux users are stupid? They're just going to be able to edit the code and remove the ID verification check, even in the United States. Because believe it or not, I don't know if you know this United States government, but guess what? Linux is free and open source, and anyone can make a tweak to it. And guess what? If somebody wanted to make an illegal version of Linux, they totally could. Have you not heard of fucking Tails OS? So I'm going to cap this video off right here by saying two things. One, this is pointless. This is a waste of time. This cannot be implemented. I understand this is like a horrific thing to be thinking about. This is literally impossible. The government can try, but believe it or not, unlike China, we don't have infrastructure locking people out and making sure that communication is completely fucking controlled by the state. It had to be manufactured over multiple fucking years. And the same thing with North Korea's intranet. Are we gonna start utilizing an intranet? Is that what we're gonna fucking do? No. No, we're not. And until we're getting to that point, then it's completely impossible. And a large chunk of this, and I mentioned this earlier in the Discord ID verification video as well. If you haven't seen that, feel free to go check that out. The huge thing that's going on is that this is a push by two different groups. AI companies and parents that don't know how to deal with their fucking kids. So let's talk a little bit about AI groups. The AI groups in question, mostly Palantir and OpenAI, as I mentioned earlier, really just want all of your fucking data. They just want as much as that of your data as possible. They want to twirl it around like fucking spaghetti and then just... right? Adobe wants that sweet, sweet information. NVIDIA wants that sweet, sweet information. Palantir wants that sweet, sweet information. OpenAI wants that sweet, sweet information. Anthropic wants that sweet, sweet information. Everyone wants that information. Now, let me elaborate on the parents part. This is all specifically because of things like Roblox being a complete cesspit full of nothing but child predators. That is mostly what it is. You ever heard of a fucking condo game? I wish I hadn't. But guess what? Now that this is being thrown into the equation, and now that Roblox is doing ID verification because of this type of shit, because of the amount of malicious actors that are specifically targeting a site that is meant mostly for children, that's why this is happening. All of this is why this type of shit is happening. It is extremely frustrating, and I really do mean deeply, extremely frustrating, that because parents are just allowing their kids to go onto TikTok and look at basically anything, or go onto Snapchat and go look at basically fucking anything, which Snapchat has some fucking problems, by the way. If I wanted to delve into a more diabolical fucking chatting app, it would be Snapchat. I don't know who lets their fucking 13-year-old have access to Snapchat. That's fucking insane. And the same thing with Instagram Reels, or YouTube Shorts, or Facebook, or Twitter, or any of these sites. Children should not be given free and unrestricted, unsupervised time on the internet. If you're a parent, watch your fucking kid. You signed up for this. I didn't. Because if I did end up becoming a father, then guess what? I would not be letting my kid have free, unrestricted access to the internet. And I am saying this as a person who is not just a person who's interested in my own freedoms online and other people's freedoms online, but I am coming at this as a person who was the victim of predation online. I have been groomed on the internet. I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to get into that, but guess what? It was a thing that happened, and it fucked me up. And so what I am asking for parents to do, this is my big call to action for parents, is to get your fucking kid off the internet, or at least, if you're not going to do that, then you supervise them. How about you fucking do your job as a parent? You signed up for this, and if you can't be a fucking parent, then you put them through foster care. I don't fucking care. Just do not trample on my rights, do not trample on other people's rights, because you can't control your little fucking goblin. Just because your kid goes into the liquor store and steals a bottle of tequila doesn't mean that I shouldn't be allowed to go into the liquor store at that point. And you know what? If you let your kid steal a bottle of tequila from the liquor store, then you're a bad fucking parent. And everyone would agree with that. But no, because it's the internet and because it's just, oh no, they're allowed to do whatever, then no, they're not seen, it's not seen as a problem. I hate the fact that you, being a bad parent, is forcing the government to parent your children. Grow some fucking balls and accept your responsibilities. And for the people that are interested in protecting their freedoms online, this is my call to action in regards to this. If you live in California, or you live in Colorado, or you live in any other state that is trying to enforce this type of legislation in the future, call your legislators, your governors, your district attorneys, your state reps. Ask them the following questions here. What is your definition of an operating system? What operating systems will be targeted? How do you plan on actually making this possible? What if people just refuse to update their operating systems? What if it's impossible to retroactively change an operating system? Is there a cutoff date and time for this? Is this the fine for the end user or the company? Those are the questions that you should be asking. Oh boy, I needed to get all of that off my chest. I feel fucking great. And you know what? I hope you all are feeling great. And like I've been trying to say in the rest of my videos, don't give up hope. There is hope for a better future. You just have to sit down and you have to fight for it. And you have to tell people the ugly fucking truth sometimes. I would like to shout out some of my friends before I head out. So, I would like to shout out a new upcoming streamer and a very close friend of mine, the Caffeinated Cucumber. Caffeinated Cucumber is a mostly Splitgate streamer who streams on Twitch, and I will be on his streams every once in a while, so if you ever want to see me on stream, I'll be on his streams. Another streamer and good friend of mine is Volbite. Volbite has been streaming for quite a while now, and has been doing a lot of very interesting things. Whether or not that is installing distros of Linux, or playing different games, or working on Blender models, or working on coding his own little robot assistant Tib, the talking toaster. Things like that. So I would also like to recommend checking out Volbite. I'm also going to shout out a couple of my artist friends. Beastly Deer, formerly Beast Studios. On the right, you can see a few samples of their art. Rainbun, here you can also see a few samples of their art. Glitchy Zone, a few samples of their art. And Alexis Wasilla, a few examples of their art as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Techmo out.